Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us Across the Fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. It's the fourth Wednesday of the month, and that means it's time for Bird Notes. Joining us is bird expert and conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont, Mark LaBarr. It's so nice to carry on this tradition of Bird Notes. It's so nice to meet you.
Yes, it's nice to meet you too, and it's great to be sitting across the table from you.
Yeah, this is very exciting for me. I love birds, but I really don't know that much about them, but it's spring, everything is on the move. There are a lot more birds in my backyard, which is fabulous.
Yeah, and you've talked about some birds that, you know, we are in a transition zone, but there are some birds that do stick around for the winter, and in going back and forth, you'd mentioned the Pileated Woodpecker, which it seems like you have a pair or
they're
around
always
the house.
there, and I see them more in the spring and the fall, so they're kind of going through, but it's always exciting. They're so prehistoric, and
they make a very loud noise, and chips fly when they're working their trees and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So they will stick around, and they're a little territorial. Okay. They have a pretty big territory, so your property may have, you know, the pairs are moving through or they're feeding on some of the trees. But
I like to see them some in the winter.
Yeah, and in the spring, you know, they're starting to nest and things are starting to pick up. So, you know, we're kind of shifting a little bit. And then you also mentioned, you know, sticking with the theme of woodpeckers, is, you know, hairy and downy woodpeckers.
So I always have to look it up. So a way to help me remember which is which.
So hairies are bigger, and I was fortunate the other day. I was taking down my feeder, you know, it's that time of the year to do that, and I had both a hairy and downy on the feeder, and when you see them together, you know, you can see the size difference. But hairies tend to be bigger. They have that bigger chiseled bill. The downies, really, that bill is, you know, pretty delicate and small. And, you know, if you have them both coming to your feeder, you can get that pattern. But it can be confusing just seeing them one at a time. It's nice to have them
downy is the small, more delicate.
They're downy, delicate. Okay. That's always, and we'll use another thing as we move on here. You know, there's all different ways that we can try to remember birds. D for delicate, that's a good way to do that. Some birds say their names, and you were mentioning the Phoebe. So so we hear the Phoebe back all the time, and they're, you know, they've been back for a couple weeks now. That's always you know, so you have birds that sing their names. Then there are other birds that are pretty easy. You see in your backyard, I'm sure, and you mentioned the bloom of color of the goldfinches.
I love that as they're starting to transition, and you can see that happening, and they just get brighter and brighter every day.
So the males get that nice yellow gold thing, so goldfinches. And what's interesting about goldfinches, and when we start thinking about songs and calls, goldfinch, when they fly, tend to say, now, potato chip, potato chip, potato chip, potato chip. Now, some people have said Doritos, Doritos, Doritos. So,
that seems pretty different to me.
Yes, but whatever mnemonic that you can come up with, and I do it all the time. You know, I do birds for a living, and every year I have to relearn a lot of my songs, and, you know, just think about them a little different. If I'm in a different place, you have to come up with ways, and so coming up with a little trick to be able to remember things is always a good thing.
The songs are always a little difficult for me, but when I hear them, so I saw a cardinal was right outside my window, so I went, oh, I love that song. What is it? I went out, oh, it's the cardinal.
Right.
Gorgeous song, just love it.
And they're, you know, they stick around too, but again, they start, breeding season is happening, and so, you know, I always think of cardinals as having a Star Wars kind of sound. It's like a pew, 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 like almost like, you know, a phaser kind of thing. But cardinals are also notorious for this time of year starting to run into windows. As they see their reflection in the window, they think that it's another cardinal on their territory. And so they will pound into that window. In fact, I had a friend asking me, you know, said something about a Kamikaze Bird that's been hitting their window.
It's very distressing when that happens. And some robins do it too, and some just, you know, just nonstop. So what do you do about that?
There's a couple of different things you want to break up that reflection. I've recommended in the past strips of aluminum foil on string that'll twirl. I mentioned a CD. You can use a CD, and ironically, my friend said,
an old CD,
yeah,
because it's reflective.
Yeah,
okay.
Which 5-6 years ago, when I recommended that, CDs, everybody, he joked, what's a CD, so with technology. But an old CD that'll move in the wind.
Right.
And just kind of break up that reflection. And often as the sun moves over the course of spring and summer, the reflection changes, so it will stop on its own.
On its own, so you just hope for the best.
Right. And the other thing about the cardinals, we saw the pictures of the male and the female. The females will also sing as well. Mm-hmm. So most birds, you just have the males doing most of the vocalizations, but the females will join in on that one as well. And as you can see, not quite as bright as the males.
Right. But still beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
I think they're just gorgeous.
Oh, yeah.
So is there a call and response often? You certainly get that. Is that a call and response, or is it just something else going on?
So if it's a pair and they're on territory and they're communicating with each other, calls are a way for birds to talk to each other, basically. And, when some birds have a limited variety of calls, and yet there are other birds like our corvids, our ravens, and our crows, which can have vocalizations. I think ravens have been documented at having 50 different kinds of vocalizations.
Wow.
So, and again, this is much like the hairy woodpecker and the downy woodpecker.
Right. Please help me with this, because I see these and I go, oh, I think that's a raven. It looks big and it looks, but it's probably just a crow, which is not a good attitude. But
so
they're both magnificent.
They are, and they're they have similar features. And here's another little thing that you can use. So ravens, as you can see, have this wedge-shaped tail. You can see, so in the top left-hand corner, that's a raven.
Right.
To the right is the crow, which has a much flatter edge to the tail.
Okay.
So a raven has a V in its name, and so V for wedge-shaped tail.
Thank you.
And the raven's got, bigger, literal stouter bill, as you can see there, and a little bit more of those feathers that come down. Not that you're going to see that really close, but usually when they're flying, if you see that wedge-shaped tail, the longer middle tail feathers out, then that's going to be a raven.
Do you see a wedge in their wing as well, or not usually?
Not so much.
Just
the tail, and they have that really croaky croak versus the caw-caw that we know of crows.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
So owls, I've seen so many more owls this year.
Right.
And some people have commented on it, but can you speak to that? It's always just wonderful and exciting.
So it has been a tough year for owls, especially barred owls. Many people have been seeing them come in. We talked a little bit about this on the last show, and last year was a really good year for food sources for owls. So it was a bumper crop of youngsters. Add that to an extensive long winter, and all of a sudden there's a food shortage. These birds are coming into feeders, into backyards, along roadsides, looking for food, and so they become very visible to us.
Right.
And some of them, unfortunately, don't make it. I know the rehab centers have been really busy with that.
Wow.
But the adults now, the ones that have made it through, they're already nesting and beginning the process and incubating at this point in time. The other owl, which is out there, there's a number of them, we'll only touch on a couple here, but is the great horned owl.
Sure.
And they're well into their breeding season now. In fact, I think I've heard reports of owlets already being seen by birders.
One of my most exciting sightings was two little owlets in Essex, Vermont.
Sure.
You just go by and you see their little eyes right over the
right over the top.
It's just so adorable.
And the great horns have that hoot hoot hoot. They're kind of the classic hoot owl, whereas the barred owl is goes who cooks for you at the end.
Right.
And we tend to see great horns more in the valleys and barred owls more well distributed across the state.
Okay.
But most of the time when owls do come into the feeders, it's usually barred owls.
Okay. And another question that I have is we have a crabapple tree that serves as food some, but then suddenly there'll be cedar waxwings that come in and they will devastated.
Right.
I mean, are they intoxicated or what? Are they
And
after?
this time of year, they can be. You know,
Yeah.
those things, those berries sit there and they do ripen, and it can be problematic. During other times of the year, especially after the breeding season, in the fall and such, the birds will move through, and like you said, they'll clean a tree out.
Right.
But as that fruit starts to mature and starts to get a little bit of alcohol, it can be problematic, and they can find themselves flying into windows and unfortunately
so again,
in the bad. Yeah.
Might help.
It might help in that situation, but you never know with drunk birds what they're going to do. So.
So song and call one
Right.
more time. What's the difference?
So song and call is basically a communication of birds between themselves. A classic one that I like to do is the black-capped chickadee. You know, we all know chickadees because of their song, chickadee dee dee dee, or their
Right.
call rather. It's chickadee dee
That's
dee.
their call.
That's their call, and that's something that you'll hear all winter long. You'll hear them when they're coming into feeders and they're flocking and they're telling each other where they are. And then the call is that we start hearing this time of the year.
So, sorry, we're almost out of time.
Yep.
So how can we be good stewards for birds?
Yeah, lots of different things, and we talk about them. Bird feeders,
Sure.
it's a great thing to do. Good time to bring them in, just because of bears. You
Yep.
know, we don't want to have that
Right, they're looking
interaction.
out, too.
But putting them out and providing a winter food source. Also, this is a great time to put out boxes or clean out your bluebird boxes or nest boxes. Here's a nice one with the bluebird on it. And then just in your backyard, Audubon has a plants for birds thing. You can go on our website and you can plant a lot of native plants that provide food and cover for birds and create
not
that
just
space in your backyard.
Wine for them.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry, Mark, we are all out of time. This would go quickly. Thank you so much for coming in.
Sure. I look forward to next month.
You bet.
Yeah.
More questions. Send your
Yes.
questions in to Mark. There's Mark LaBarr at the Audubon Society. Please send in your questions, and we'll get to some of them next time. Thanks for joining us. Across the Fence, I'm Fran Stoddard.